This R6 content creator went from one of the most loved Siege creators in history to being despised by anyone that knew his name in a matter of just a few days. This is how Get Flanked destroyed his YouTube career. Get Flanked started his channel on January 15th of 2015, just less than a year before Siege's release in December of that year. Get Flanked, or Dylan, was ahead of the curve when it came to Siege content creation. Because he was making content as early as the Siege beta. He was ahead of the curve compared to the large number of Siege content creators that exist today.
What is up, guys? This is Get Flanked, and today I'm going to give you my review of the Rainbow Six Siege beta.
This was great for him, because this meant that he had almost zero competition. Because of this and his laid-back personality, Get Flanked quickly rose to the charts, becoming one of the best Siege content creators at the time. At the time of this recording, he has over 400,000 subscribers, most of which came from the beginning of Siege's life as a game. Now, at the exact same time that Get Flanked started to get traction, another Siege shortly after was getting traction as well. This content creator went by the name of Rogue9. Rogue9 was very similar to Get Flanked's sort of content style. It was very informative and matter of fact, but also laid back and real. These people weren't throwing big words at your face, and they were relatable, which made people want to watch them even more than the other guys. Because of this, Rogue9 also gained a lot of popularity very early on, just like Get Flanked did, and there still wasn't very much competition either. Because of this, eventually these two content creators would meet, and at first, their friendship absolutely blossomed. They were very alike, very entertaining, and very friendly to each other. A stark contrast to what would happen after a series of events that would turn both of them against each other forever, and would ultimately lead to Get Flanked's eventual downfall. But we aren't there yet. As much as there is drama between them to come, and even to this day, when they first met, they hit it off a lot. So much so that they started their own podcast about Rainbow Six Siege called the Hot Reach Podcast. This podcast was mainly about Siege, but was more than just that. This podcast was what made them friends in the first place, and also gained them a lot of traction. When either of them would mention said podcast to their viewer base on their own respective channels, every one of their viewers would see the other content creator that was also on the podcast and follow them too, leading to both of these content creators gaining followings off of each other and ultimately growing as a two-man unit. Not only did they get to talk about the game they loved and do it while being friends, but they got to get a lot of money and following off of it too. So much so that Ubisoft themselves saw the potential of this podcast and invited the dynamic duo to do a podcast on set inside of Ubisoft's recording studio. This was a huge deal because it meant that if this was successful, this partnership between the Hot Reach podcast and Ubisoft could turn into something permanent. Whether it be even just something as simple as a sponsorship or a full-blown studio job at Ubisoft's headquarters, the possibilities weren't only endless, but they were only good. But there was one small issue. You see, before any of this was officialized, and as Ubisoft was finally reaching out, Rogue9, unbeknownst to Get Flanked, had actually been trying to flirt with a Ubisoft employee while all of this was going on. This didn't end up going well for Rogue, and he ended up getting friend-zoned by the person he was going for. It's unfortunate, but there was no real wrongdoing here. Nothing bad came out of this immediately, so for now it didn't matter, but this would eventually become something very important down the line. Because what I haven't told you yet is that this Ubisoft employee was actually the head of the team that was trying to get the podcast over to Ubisoft. Rogue9 didn't know this and only found out until later. After Rogue9 got friend-zoned, he and the Ubisoft employee agreed to keep things nothing but private between them two and professional moving forward when they were to meet in person. Something they both agreed to, but that the Ubisoft employee ended up ignoring. To set the scene, let's fast forward a little bit to when the two members of the Hot Reach podcast arrive at Ubisoft. One thing that is crucial for me to mention to you here is that immediately things at Ubisoft HQ from the employee side was extremely unprofessional, with the Ubisoft employees literally using Tinder as an icebreaker. I mean, that is just absolutely wild and unacceptable from not only a professional standpoint, but also from a standpoint that it was the Ubisoft employee herself that said she was the one wanting to keep things professional. But from here, it unfortunately keeps getting worse and worse and worse. The entire event and the few days that it lasted, Ubisoft employees treated this business meeting as like a vacation. Employees weren't working or actually discussing anything, often using Tinder as stated before, or just flat out talking to each other and flirting with each other. No work was actually getting done. Some people weren't even showing up, and the worst part of it is that the entire time throughout everything, Rogue 9 was being treated terribly by all of the female employees. Whether this was because of what had happened with him getting friend-zoned or not remained a mystery, at least up until then, but Rogue 9 felt nothing but terrible about the entire event and what had happened there. Come to find out later, everything Rogue 9 was saying in confidence to Get Flanked, or Dylan, whatever you want to call him, about the situation, about how he was being treated, Get Flanked was straight up telling the Ubisoft employees behind Rogue 9's back. Or at least that's what's to be believed. There's one more person that is involved in the podcast that I haven't mentioned his name yet, and they also requested to stay out of the drama as well, so I can't really say that it was them that did this. So I'm just going to assume, for the sake of the video and the drama itself, that Get Flanked was the one telling the Ubisoft employees. In my and most other people's opinions, this was just Dylan's way of making himself look better to get potential partnerships or relationships with Ubisoft, or even the women employees that were supposed to be working with them. Making yourself look good by putting down others is not only something an absolute snake of a friend would do, but it's immoral and shows a lack of confidence so big that it's nothing short of insane. After this, it was clear to Ubisoft and the two people at the Hot Breach podcast that something in the air was just wrong. But Rogue 9 was the only one left in the dark about all of this. When both of the two content creators went back home after the event, Get Flanked started to grow distant from Rogue, and moments later, completely just removed him from the podcast. Not only did this happen, but Ubisoft also reached out to Rogue and said that they wanted to cut ties with him too, due to rude, dismissive, or condescending behavior. But when Rogue 9 asked both the Hot Breach podcast and Ubisoft why they had done this, nothing. Now, before any of this was public to most people, Get Flanked uploaded his explanation of what had happened to YouTube and why the Hot Breach podcast went under. It's an 18-minute long video, but as Rogue 9 said, it is completely full of lies.
Stand. You will remember from the last video that I politely inquired of Ubisoft what exactly I did during that week that would count as rude, condescending, or dismissive behavior, and I never received an answer. 1 week after the event, on the Discord call where Get Flanked informed me that they were kicking me off the podcast, I asked both of the guys what exactly I did during any of the workshop sessions that supposedly crossed the line in terms of my behavior towards Ubisoft staff, and neither of them could come up with a single incident either. Nobody can give me a single real incident of anything specific I'm supposed to have done, and even in his 18-minute video, the only story where Get Flanked alleges any unprofessional behavior is the story about me being upset at the questionable behavior during the Tinder incident, and as I've explained, that story is so full of inaccuracies that I can only call it a lie.
Not to mention, this video was posted on his second channel, which at the time was a Valorant channel. The reason he didn't do this on his Siege channel, you may be asking? Well, the only difference I see is that his second channel has significantly less followers and viewers than his first channel, which leads me and many other people to believe that Get Flanked wanted as little people to know about this as possible. That is the behavior of someone who is guilty and knows they're in the wrong, or at the very least has something to hide. If you know you did nothing wrong, and you're not afraid of something bad coming out of the drama, you would be confident in yourself, and any defenses that would have come out of the video you made. Something that Rogue 9 can attest to. So much so that you'd put it on your main channel, for example. But that's not what Get Flanked did. And as you can see by the comments on screen, his community started to take notice. So why was he so desperate to make Ubisoft employees like him, as well as desperate to obviously keep their connection so much that he'd lie and try to cover up the truth? Well, no one knows for absolute sure, but based off of his Twitter bio that clearly implies that he now works at Ubisoft, I think we know all that we need to know, and we probably know why. But after all of this, the drama still wasn't over, because there was one more thing that would nail in the coffin for Get Flanked. Rogue 9 made a response video, but this time on a channel where a lot more people would see it. This is the beginning and eventual end of the downfall of Get Flanked. In this video Rogue9 made, he systematically went through everything that GetFlanked said in his video, as well as everything that happened at the event with Ubisoft, with nothing but rock-solid proof, logic, and evidence as to what had happened, and the fact that GetFlanked had clearly lied, or at least at the bare minimum, gone behind Rogue9's back.
During the next morning, we were all in the meeting room that we'd been working in, and Pete was sitting beside me with his laptop open, but not actively working on it. He was the only one who'd brought a laptop, and so the podcast draft that we'd prepared the evening before was on that laptop. I had an idea for a slightly different flow to the podcast that would do a better job at telling the story around balancing in Rainbow Six Siege over the years, and I thought the best way of me being able to present that to the guys would be to prepare a second draft agenda and pitch it to them with notes already prepared. And so I borrowed that laptop during the session to create an alternative draft, and I saved it as a completely new version while keeping the old one unchanged. When I presented the new idea to the guys, I remember specifically mentioning that I'd kept the old version that we had worked on the night before, and that if they didn't like my proposal, we could go back to the first draft or use a compromise between the two. But no need, both of the guys were happy with my proposal, and we simply went with the new plan. So the key point here is that I borrowed the laptop when it wasn't being used, I saved the old draft in case we wanted to go back to it, and when I shared my new ideas, GetFlanked was happy to run with them. But here's how he remembers this story.
But in that brainstorming session, there was a point where he literally takes Pete's laptop that Pete's taking notes on from Pete, clears the entire agenda, and then fills it in and is like, here, I fixed it, and hands it back. And it was really offensive. It just, and again, that was the first time that we were really going at each other. Okay, up to that point, we were at least getting along. Okay, the three of us, me, Pete, and Rogue.
This was a huge blow to GetFlanked and his reputation and credibility. Most people, after Rogue9's response, were completely against GetFlanked, as well as most of the viewers that GetFlanked had watching his videos too. With nothing but hate coming to this YouTuber's way, it seemed that GetFlanked's position in the Siege hierarchy had completely fallen, and so had his career. GetFlanked hasn't posted any informational Siege videos in a while, likely due to the drama and the amount of views that he's just not getting anymore. But unfortunately, the same can also be said for Rogue9 as well. One thing is for sure though, that throughout all of this, GetFlanked was nothing short of a bad person. He loves to preach on his channel about being non-toxic to teammates, getting better, and improving yourself as a person. All of that when this is also literally him.
I'm coming to you guys.
Jackal, smoke and plant, dude. It's empty.
Jackal, smoke and plant.
Jackal doesn't have smokes. Just play behind the wardrobe.
Drop the fucking diffuser.
Cover the diffuser. The diffuser has been secured.
I'll res.
I've got you.
Diffuser has been recovered.
So even after that clip and all of the drama, it's clear to everybody that he used his friend, embarrassed him too, and all for just making himself look better in front of some girls and Ubisoft as a company. Because of this, and the lack of respect that the Siege community has for him, GetFlanked absolutely destroyed his Siege content creation career. But with that out of the way, my name is Alka, check out this next video, and I hope we'll see you there. Later.